haunting mountain's wind whistles through skeletal pines. Snow swirls under a half-lit sky. On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 young Soviet skiers camped on the barren slopes of Kolat-Syakhl, the ominously named Dead Mountain in the local Mansi tongue. They would never return. Over the next weeks, rescuers would uncover a shattered tent, frozen footprints leading into the dark, and 9 bodies with inexplicable wounds. What force could have driven experienced hikers to slash open their own tent and flee barefoot into minus 40 degrees Celsius darkness? This is the chilling mystery that has echoed through the Ural wilderness ever since. In late 1958, the USS Mir was in the flush of Sputnik-era confidence, and young people were urged to conquer nature in service of the state. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, embodied that spirit. He built radios and telescopes as a boy and now led top-flight engineering students on daredevil outdoor treks. Under Komsomol sponsorship, they planned a grueling 300-kilometer winter ski trek across the northern Urals, aiming for highest Soviet Grade 3 mountaineering status. Their route would take them north of Sverdlovsk through remote Mansi hunting grounds, culminating at the peaks of Oterten and Kolat-Syakhl. These wooded slopes rising into the Arctic tundra were gentle in outline but punishing in winter. Deep drifts, brittle cold, and hurricane winds were the real foes. By mid-January 1959, the cheerful group, 8 students and 1 instructor, had gathered equipment and cameras, eager to demonstrate Soviet vigor on the long-awaited trek. January 23, 1959. Left Sverdlovsk tonight. We're full of hope as the train takes us north. 2 days into the journey, in a ramshackle logging camp called 2nd Northern, team member Yuri Yudin suffered a leg flare-up. On January 28th, he was forced to abandon the expedition and head back, unknowingly becoming the only survivor. The remaining 9 skiers pushed onward by bus, truck, and sleigh, trudging finally on skis into the desolate forest. They planned to reach the village of Vizhai by February 12th to telegram home. When that telegram never arrived, relatives grew worried, and on February 20th, a search party was dispatched into the frozen wild. Over the last days of January, the group skied deeper into the Ural backcountry, snapping photos and writing in their communal journal. The sky grew higher and colder. On January 31st, they pitched their final camp on a snow-covered slope around 1,079 meters elevation. The night sky was frigid and clear. Perhaps in the last hours before dawn, the sled weighed with gear, and the campers turned in under the tent's canvas, unaware that a storm was building. Journal entry: clouds on the horizon, wind rising. We've arranged the stove and supper. Everyone is tired, but spirits high. Heading up from the tree line feels free and alive. By 11:30 p.m. on February 1st, a powerful snowstorm was raging. The wind howled in gusts, ice crystals stung any exposed skin, and the mercury had plunged well below freezing. These skiers, all winter veterans, knew that a clear, starry night could turn lethal under the wrong circumstances. Yet inside their tent, the scene was calm. Food was cooked, candles lit, the stove was banked, and logs stacked in the fire pit next to the tent. February 1st to 2nd. In the depth of that night, something shattered the peace. In the dark, an unseen terror seemed to grip the hikers. The canvas of the tent was cut from the inside, as if its own occupants clawed their way out. Outside, the storm raged. Barefoot or in socks, many of the skiers fled into 20 below zero darkness without even grabbing their boots. We can only imagine their panic, stamping feet raw for warmth, stumbling through deep drifts, hearing only the roar of the blizzard and the pounding of hearts. Witnesses later would describe why the victims did this as the central, apparently inexplicable mystery of the case. No one saw what frightened them. Perhaps an avalanche? The roar of collapsing snow? Or something unseen in the blizzard's howl? The skinny mountain slope above the tree line offered no place to hide, no shelter beyond that flimsy tent. Whatever the cause, in moments, the 9 skiers found themselves cast from their camp into isolation and terror. They ran aimlessly downhill into the forest, fading into a vast silence of white and night. 2 days later, on February 26, 1959, a student volunteer and his comrades finally reached Dead Mountain. As the storm subsided, they found the tent, torn and half collapsed, nestled under 4 feet of snow. The cuts in the canvas were clean and made from inside. Inside lay books, cameras, rucksacks, all in order. Food was strewn on a plate as if supper was about to be served, but the hikers were gone. Footprints crisscrossed the packed snow outside. Investigators noted very distinct tracks of 8 or 9 people headed downhill toward the trees. Almost every footprint was sock or barefooted. One showed a single ski boot. Here was the bizarre evidence. Grown men fleeing in panic while snow and night enveloped them. That morning, some 500 meters from camp, Two bodies were found under a cedar tree at the forest's edge. Yuri Krivonishchenko and Yuri Doroshenko, both in underwear, lay frozen beside a small fire. The mercury that night had dipped to minus 40 degrees Celsius, yet their coats and boots lay neatly where they had been left by the tent. The coroner was shocked. Krivonishchenko's fingers were charred to blackness, and in his mouth was a chunk of his own flesh, a piece he'd apparently bitten off in delirium. Doroshenko's hair was singed on one side. He had a scorched wool sock on his foot. Both men had myriad bruises and cuts, but no obvious cause of death beyond the cold. Further up the slope, roughly 300 yards from the cedar, lay Igor Dyatlov and Zenaida Kolmogorova. They faced toward the camp with fists clenched, as if desperately trying to crawl back to safety. Nearby was the third male victim, Rustem Slobodin, discovered a few days later. He, too, had one sock and one rubber boot, and his autopsy noted a small fracture of the skull. By this point, 5 bodies were recovered. All 5 showed classic signs of hypothermia. Medics later noted paradoxical undressing, victims stripping off clothes despite freezing temperatures. Most had died of cold, but each also bore peculiar bruises and abrasions from their frantic retreat. 4 skiers were still missing. Rescuers hesitated to continue in the treacherous spring thaw, but in early May the snow finally relented. A Muncie hunter's dog slipped into the trees and found a crude snow cave with pieces of clothing and wood twigs. The remains of an improvised snow den, about 250 feet from the cedar tree. When authorities excavated it, they pulled out the final 4 victims: Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Lyudmila Dubinina, packed together under at least 10 feet of snow. This second group told an even darker story. 3 of them had suffered horrifying internal trauma. Thibault Brignol's skull was shattered so badly that bone fragments lay in his brain. Zolotaryov and Dubinina had every rib broken. Their chests were crushed in by an immense force. In fact, pathologists said the damage to these bodies was similar to what is typically seen as the result of an impact of an automobile moving at high speed. Yet none of them had penetrating wounds or external blows. The skin was intact. The mouths of both Zolotaryov and Dubinina had been taped or bound, and eerily their eyes were gone. Dr. Ivanov's autopsy noted empty eye sockets, and Dubinina was missing her tongue and part of her upper lip. Some of the survivors' own clothing was found on them, as if they had dressed each other's frozen corpses. Even more strange, laboratory tests later detected elevated radiation on several items of clothing recovered from the camp and bodies. By late May 1959, the grim inventory was complete. 6 victims had clearly frozen to death. 3 had inexplicable crushing injuries. Soviet investigators, stumped, ruled no foul play and attributed it all to an unknown compelling natural force. They closed the case, classifying the files. In the sterile report, Chief Investigator Lev Ivanov wrote only that the tourist had fallen victim to an overwhelming force beyond their resistance. The tent, shredded as if from the inside, was boxed up in evidence. Officials who had approved the expedition or searched the site, university deans, party bosses, were quietly removed from their posts. Nothing more would be heard officially about Dyatlov Pass for decades.
And so the Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. Did a piece of the mountain itself turn on these hikers? Was it a terrifying avalanche or something more clandestine? In the end, every hypothesis feels incomplete.